But
It really needed you.
yeah.
Well, we're glad that you're here, and we're glad that everybody is here. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Catherine from Canio's Books, and we're in for a real treat tonight with the poets Spencer Reece and Diane Glancy. I'll ask if you wouldn't mind muting yourself if you are not already muted. That would be appreciated. So I just want to make a couple of announcements before we get to the main event here. As some of you may know, Canio's Books, which you can see the store behind me, is celebrating its 40th anniversary as of October 1. So it's kind of an odd time to be celebrating because we cannot all be together. Normally, as many of you know, we have a very intimate, wonderful space, but we really can't congregate or gather to celebrate. So we're being creative, we're asking our friends and our writers who have been with us to share a story, to share your story, your Canio's moment, either written or spoken. And I'm going to drop in the chat the link for you to go to find out how you might do that. In addition, if you really appreciate tonight's event, we do have a not-for-profit that helps us maintain a brick and mortar presence on Main Street, Canio's Cultural Cafe. It's an educational nonprofit, and I will drop the link for donations there, and we appreciate your generosity. Also, we want to support these two incredible writers through the purchase of their books. So we, of course, want you to come in the store to get them, but if you are not near us, I will drop in the chat also our online offering where you can acquire either books by either of the writers, and that way we will get credit for it via bookshop.org, which is an amazing new offering for very, very small indies, of which Canio's Books is. So then just briefly, two events coming at us in the near future. On the 26th, Saturday the 26th at 5:30, we have the civil rights activists Janet Duarte-Bell and Louis Steele. They're veterans of the civil rights movement. And they're going to be in discussion about their friendship, about women, Black women in the civil rights movement, and the reckoning of white privilege. So that ought to be a very interesting discussion on the 26th at 5:30. Then at the end of the month, our Confronting Racism film series will screen the film Cracking the Codes on Wednesday, September 30th. And that film looks at the causes and consequences of systemic racism, and it's in-depth interviews with the diverse professionals involved in civil rights, race, and white privilege education. So that's on Wednesday, September 30th at 7 p.m. So those are events to look forward to. And I guess I should actually round out that Turtle Point Press, who is the press for Diane Glancy's book, is celebrating their 30th anniversary. And on Wednesday, October 21 at 7, we are going to have a celebration of the press and the bookstore with writers, distinguished writers to join us, and they will be announced later. So the links for all of these things are on our website. For tonight's talk, if you have questions, we ask you to post them in the chat, and after the conversation between Diane and Spencer, they will respond to your questions. So now I'm going to hand it over to Marianne, who is that way on my screen, and she will introduce our special guests. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to be together, even in this way, this evening. We're so honored to welcome Spencer Reece and Diane Glancy this evening. And I do want to thank CJ Purdy, who is on our call, for linking us. You know, these are really strange and challenging times, but we are finding new connections and new friends and new community, you know, even in this way at this time. I want to give a little bit of background about both of our guests. Of course, tonight our book of the moment is a beautiful, beautiful illustration there of William Blake's from the Book of Job on the cover of Diane Glancy's book, Island of the Innocent, a consideration of the Book of Job. We have, I'll just show you also Spencer Reece's more recent poetry volume, The Road to Emmaus, and tell you a little bit about our guests tonight. Diane Glancy is a poet, a novelist, essayist, playwright, and professor emeritus at Macalester College. Her works have won the Pablo Neruda Prize for Poetry, the R.L. Gibson Lifetime Achievement Award from the Oklahoma Center for the Book, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Native Writers Circle of the Americas, among many other awards. In 2018, Publishers Weekly named her book, Pushing the Bear, excuse me, a novel of the Trail of Tears, as one of 10 essential Native American novels. We have copies of these books at the bookshop, and Diane joins us this evening from Kansas, so we welcome her. And in conversation with Diane, a longtime friend, Spencer Reece. Spencer Reece is a poet and an Episcopal priest. His first collection of poems, The Clerk's Tale, won the Bakeless Prize in 2003. He has received an NEA grant, a Guggenheim, a Whiting Writers Award, and the Amy Lowell Traveling Scholarship, among other awards. His poems have been published in the New Yorker magazine, in Poetry, the American Scholar, and the New Republic. Spencer Reece has served at the Honduran orphanage of Our Little Roses, and also served with the Bishop of Spain for the Reformed Episcopal Church in Madrid. Currently, he's joining us from Connecticut, and we hope to welcome Spencer soon to Long Island, and one day out to Canio's books in Sag Harbor. So our program for this evening will be a conversation and readings with Spencer and Diane around the subject of suffering. Diane's book combines the Book of Job with the history of the Native American peoples in North America. And we will have time for questions, as Catherine mentioned. If you'd like to share a question, please put that in the chat. So I turn our program over now to our esteemed guests. We may try a Zoom applause to welcome them. Thank you both, Diane and Spencer. We give it to you now.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, Marianne, congratulations to you and Catherine for 40 years. I mean, that is amazing for a bookstore. So
thank you.
It's also custom to acknowledge ancestral land. So I want to thank the Shinnecock tribe.
Shinnecock, the Shinnecock.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to begin by reading just a few passages from Island of the Innocent, and then Spencer and I will talk. I've always loved the book of Job in the Old Testament, and I wanted to contemporize it. So I doubt that Job had a canoe in those days, but he does in the opening poem. May lit the sky. Job's canoes unfastened, hay rolls unrolled. Sabaeans, 3 bands of Chaldeans, fire and whirlwind, take 7 sons and 3 daughters, the flocks and herds, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 asses, 500 yoke of oxen. 3 friends and a 4th come from their own places to talk about the reasons for suffering, blaming Job of wrongdoing, but as it turns out, is a trial from God, the lovely one, who taunts Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves to the Lord. This is interesting enough. And I go on and write more about Job. And then in the writing, the voices of Native history began to intrude. And I kept thinking, can I do this? And I went ahead and added it. One of the first passages is about the Little Bighorn, in which General George Custer was defeated, murdered actually, in 1876. And this is a very small portion. Chief Gull recounts the hill where it happened. If I could have one dance, it would be that one, enough to hold me through the winters that followed. It was the dark ages after that, buffalo gone, our will to thrive. We never won another battle. The winds that followed blew us into little cutout houses, fold back doors, plastic buffalo, cowboys still after. I want to put the book of Job also in a nutshell. A man who suffered loss, which uncovered a flaw in his character, which he acknowledged and corrected, and all was restored. So instead of 7,000 sheep, they had 14,000 sheep, of which his wife asked, "What are we going to do with them?" This poem is called There Was in Us, and it's a cento from chapters 29 and 30. A cento is when you take words already written and place them on your page. It's an easy way to write. And this is Job's voice. I delivered the poor that cried, and the fatherless, and him that had none to help. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was father to the poor. The cause I knew not, I searched out. My root was spread by the water. The dew lay all night upon my branch. Men kept silent at my counsel. Their tongue cleaved to the roof of their mouth. Justice was my robe. I broke the jaws of the wicked and plucked the prey from their teeth. Now they hold me in derision, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with my dogs. They were driven from among men to dwell in cliffs, in caves and rocks. They cut up mallows and juniper roots for their meat. Among the bushes they brayed, and under nettles they gathered. They were children of fools, children of base men. They were viler than the earth. The footnote after this poem says, yikes. There it is. Unlike the impenetrable Leviathan, Job is descaled. He thought himself a righteous man, yet his trials uncovered his shortcomings in his snippish and arrogant attitude, which he repented of. He said later, I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. And one more very brief passage before Spencer begins to talk. I also found my own voice. I drove to Nebraska, I drove to Pittsburgh, and my own voice intruded also. And I gave myself permission because the book of Job actually has 12 voices in it: God, Satan, Job, Job's wife, the 4 messengers who came to say all is lost, and then Job's 3 friends, and there was a 4th one, Elihu, that came after. As if 3 wasn't enough, another one showed up. So during the years that I was writing this book, I was also tracing my family history. And this is one short paragraph. It's called Jumpsuit. This is what it was after not knowing, but hearing fragments of what happened and versions and reversions of those fragments. I looked for her grave, piecing together family history, driving from Kansas to Moffett, Oklahoma, on the Fort Smith, Arkansas border, by the Arkansas River, out in the country where dirt roads send a trail of dust. Arvizina Crawford Lewis, my great-great-grandmother, born in Tennessee. She went to Candy's Creek Mission School, established for Cherokee children by Dr. Samuel Worster, a missionary to the Cherokee. She was there, my great-great-grandmother, with her spelling book and pencil, in her chair at a table, writing letters of the alphabet that made words from her spelling book. Her mother, Mary Waters Crawford, her grandfather, Michael Waters, on the 1835 Cherokee census. And it goes on about how I got lost and etc. But that's just an example of the composite that this book is, this strange book. It's been called strange. All right, Spencer.
Well, I just love Diane. I'd be happy to just have her read for the next 20 minutes. I love you so much. I think you're a national treasure. I was asked to read this book one day before the pandemic started by Ruth Greenstein, who's on this. Hey, darling. We love Turtle Point Press. And we got together at Pan Quotidien on 5th and 9th. And had ginger lemon, this ginger lemon drink they make there is so good. And she passed me Diane's book in that moment and asked if I would endorse it. And I was thrilled and honored to do so. And the two wonderful owners of this bookstore, Catherine and Marianne, congratulations. I am all about supporting and celebrating independent bookstores. So I'm so glad there's so many people on this call, and anything I can do to promote independent bookstores, I will do it. Just about anything. I just think they're the best places on earth, the way they smell and you know, when you get together with people and can chat in bookstores. And there's people on this call from Madrid, Anna Hundert, who I knew in the cathedral there. That's so sweet to see you. And people from the new church where I'm going. Henry's here, and I saw Sylvia here, who's in charge of the food distribution ministry at St. Mark's in Jackson Heights, and I'm so excited to get to know them, and I can't believe that I'm going there to St. Mark's in Jackson Heights, a church that has gone through tremendous suffering, so the topic of tonight is certainly appropriate. The priest there died of COVID in April. The church has been shut for 7 months, and we will reopen on St. Francis' feast day on October the 4th. So it's a great honor all the way around. So now that gives you a little bit of me, and also Diane and I have known each other. We figured out before you all got on here for 30 years. I met her when she was giving one of her first readings. She looks exactly the same, which is not fair. 30 years ago with my mother in a bookstore in Minnesota. And she captivated me. If you get a chance to buy that book, it's called Iron Woman. It was her first book of poems, and it captivated me from that moment. She captivated me, and I'm so happy to be here tonight. So before I babble endlessly, we agreed that I would read one paragraph from my thoughts about Diana in this book, which is an incredible mosaic. It's a collage. It's everything. Smart, Ruth, for picking up this book. And right now, where I have come back into America, and I feel, unfortunately, a lot of polarization, I feel like this book is something that people can turn to for hope and support, that we can all be one. No, as diverse and as crazy as we are, we can be one. And I love that message. That's my message. Okay, here's my little paragraph about Diane, and then we'll talk some more. Any questions so far? If there are, you can put them in the little chatteroo. Okay. For 40 years, Diane Glancy has been splicing and rearranging meanings and identities with her poems. She's less quick change artist than a slow evolving shape shifter. With these poems and hybrid essays, she's once again drawn the reader into her unusual mind, opening up her Bible while examining an Indian doll in a museum taken from a battlefield in western Nebraska after the massacre at Ash Hollow. Some of these poems are just so moving, it makes me weep. Because of the accrued history of European colonization, enslavement, exploitation, and forced conversions in the New World, Christianity and the Native American are rarely found harmoniously in the same sentence, let alone the same poem. If they are, you'd likely find the white space filling up with enough irony to push the poem off the page. Yet Diane Glancy's sensibility, being both Christian and a life member of the first families of the Cherokee Nation, makes her sui generis, allowing her to explore and write about two subjects until they sing, where another writer might quickly become tone deaf to the subtleties.
Thank you.
Well, You're welcome. So, I wrote more and more, but I couldn't stop writing. Blurbs are supposed to be, as Alfred Korn knows, who's on this call, like 3 sentences. And this blurb was like 3 pages. But anyway, we're here and we're not going away. And so why don't you, so do you want me to ask you a question and you can go off of that? And then our wonderful bookstore owners, when we reach about 20 minutes, are going to give us a bell will go off and we'll wrap things up. So don't worry, we won't keep you here all night. Well, I think one of the questions that we were talking about that maybe we could just start to think about is how Christianity has become almost a dirty word. In the poetry world, to mention that, I'm almost hesitant to do it, although more and more it's exactly who I am. And there's not that many writers that embrace that, talk about it, celebrate it, let alone a writer with a very strong indigenous Native American heritage,
Yes.
where there has been so much harm done. So that you coming forward on the literary stage and embracing both these things is very unusual, to say the least. Would you like to expound upon that?
Well, I think Christianity is becoming more marginalized all the time. It seems to be probably the last thing that people want to hear. And I know in academia, especially, there is an anathema against faith. You're not quite developed yet or mature if you believe in an invisible friend or in invisible beings. So I have never really understood that, because faith is something that I have needed from the very beginning. I was taken to church since I was a baby, and I've always found faith very important because life turned out to be a little bit bigger than I thought it would be. There were just more problems involved, and I needed that faith in God, in that higher being. And it has always happened. It has never failed once that I have not been saved from disaster or whatever I was facing. And it's just been a long, slow, steady building upon faith. And furthermore, I love the Bible. I think it's a wonderful literary piece. I already mentioned the different voices, the different situations, the different years over which it was written. Part of it is expository, the history of the Hebrews, and then part of it breaks into poetry. Pharaoh and his horses, he threw into the sea. And then it's monologue, it's dialogue. It just contains everything that I've ever wanted to do. I love language, and in the King James Bible especially, I have found it. So Christianity is a hard sell, and suffering, the benefits of suffering, which we're here to talk about, that's another hard sell. But there's nothing like suffering to reveal character, to let you know where you're lacking a little bit. And Job certainly found that out, and I have too. So you're the priest, Spencer. You can talk about this better than I can. I just have a pedestrian experience of having my life saved over and over, and keeping me from a lot of pitfalls because of faith, because of following certain mandates in the Bible that people think are outdated, but they certainly have been valuable in my life.
Can you talk a little bit about how you first, I'm just always interested in this, how you found writing, what drew you to poetry? I mean, I met you as a divorced woman. You had 2 children. You were arriving at Macalester College, and you had a new book come out a little later in your life. You didn't have early success. So as I ran the Unamuno author series that we founded in Madrid over the years, I found it gives people hope to hear what kept you going. What was it why poetry? And do you mind speaking into that a little bit? Because I can see there's plenty of writers on this call, people that would love to have a book, that would love to be published. What drew it to you, and why have you continued?
Yes. Well, you're right. I was late in life when I went to McAllister 40 years ago. I was in my 40s then, early 40s. I was always very quiet when I was young, and I had these little reading books, and I would make marks in them with crayons or whatever, and I actually got in trouble for it. You're not supposed to mark up books, which is true, although underlining is very important. And I just never had a way out of myself other than writing. And I had done it many years through a long marriage. I had written, but I didn't ever do anything with it. So by the time I was in my 40s, I had quite a file cabinet full of writing, and the books began to be published one after another. And so I always say, don't give up. Sometimes it takes a long time, not only to find your voice, but to find the venue in which your voice belongs. And then you have to find the publisher that wants your sort of weird work. Not that my work is weird, but it does mix and cross over a lot of genres, which you're probably not supposed to do. But it just took forever to do. And again, faith that it would be all right. Just keep going. Just sit down, be quiet, and do your work. I kept having that thought over and over. And at McAllister, I would teach, I would go home and write, or I would get up early in the morning and write. I would get rejected over and over and over. You have said that too about your book, The Clerk's Tale, how long it took to get published. And I think people need to know that. They think, oh, I've written a book. It will be in publication next year. And it's not that way at all. There's much competition. There are many writers out there. And it seems sometimes fewer and fewer publishers. But you just keep going. You know what horse blinders were in the old days? You don't look at all the down sittings and so forth. You just keep going. And I think your voice gets stronger the more struggle that you have to develop it. You just get deeper, hopefully.
Yes. So I'm deeply fascinated by Indigenous writers, by the Native American history in the United States. Did you read David Truer's, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his last name,
Sure.
called The Beating Heart of Wounded Knee, that was up for the National Book?
Mm-hmm.
Did you? It was a really interesting book, and there were, so many things in there, injustices that I had no idea about. I mean, there are so many injustices, as we're experienced with, as Job experienced in, that story is like, how many more injustices can a person possibly take?
Yeah.
And one could say the same about Native American people and what they've been through, from Columbus cutting out the tongue of a Lakota woman. I read that in that book. I read that Frank Baum, the guy that wrote The Wizard of Oz, wrote this horrible thing about Native Americans. I couldn't believe it. The guy that wrote The Wizard of Oz. So how do you make sense of that as an American, as somebody who carries all that inside of you? Or is the only way to just sort of, in this book, it's sort of like you're not answering things, you're knitting it all together, and we're left to...
Right, the narrative is there. There's actually been nothing but injustice. Although in my research, there were 1 or 2 boarding schools where the Indian children came from dysfunctional families and starvations, and they found a home and a bed and something to eat. But mainly it was the ripping off of language and culture. And we don't do well when we are without that. And it's led to much abuse and alcoholism and drug use and purposelessness and things like that. So I think we're still at the point of getting the story out, of narrating it. That has been my work for years, is these first person narratives of what it was like to be Sacagawea traveling with Lewis and Clark, or the Cherokee on the Trail of Tears, or Kateri Tekakwitha, who lived through the smallpox epidemic and was converted by the Mohawks, by the Jesuits in the 17th century. And so to find a bright story, it's like Job in the middle of his trials. There was really no hope. And then you have these people come and say, what's wrong with you, Job? What have you done wrong? And so the natives have also taken a lot of blame for the difficulties in recreating their lives, recreating culture. It's not easy to do at all. And you get a lot of bitterness. I've been to many conferences over the years where I could hear the anger in the throats of those on the panel who had been to boarding schools or whose fathers had been to boarding schools. And I'm sitting here, a Christian, it didn't go over very well. And they have said to me, you can't be a Christian and a Native American, but that's not true. You can. But I don't know, you're still in the swamp. You're still in the middle of the book of Job, where these sufferings just do not go away. They seem to be passed down in the DNA from generation to generation. So how do you handle it? You either join the Center of Native American Resistance, nativism, which I have not. I would rather sit in my study and write and be a Christian and go to church. So that we are now finding out, and the reclamation of Native language and culture. So it's just going many different ways.
Would you mind reading another section of your beautiful book?
What do you want to hear, Job or Native? Or I can read what I was going to read at the end, how the positivity of Native culture. Every January, I drive to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and teach in the low residency MFA program at Carlow University. And 2 years ago, when I came back from Pittsburgh, I got caught in a terrible blizzard, and I just kept going because the ancient ones were there with me. This takes about 2 minutes to read. Travel from Pittsburgh. Writing the versions, a recurrence of variation. And it has an epigraph. Living as we do in a broken world, essays are bound to become more broken and fragmented. Hilton Als, Introduction, The Best American Essays, 2018. January 11th to the 12th, 2019, in a Midwest snowstorm, I drove 840 miles from Pittsburgh to Kansas City in 17 hours. East of Effingham, Illinois, I saw a haze that was the beginning of the snow. It continued to snow until I reached my house in Kansas. I don't often drive that long at one time, but it was too hard to get off the road. I stopped for gas up snow-packed exit ramps, and that was it. 40 miles an hour for the last 250 miles across Missouri, St. Louis, west to Kansas City. I couldn't see the line on the highway because the road was covered with snow, but the warning grooves at the side of the road growled if I got on them. I felt I was driving in the sky. There were times I felt my car leave the road where another world moved. Turning ahead a couple of pages. The old ones traveled with me. The old ones traveled with the car. I followed them through the snow. I knew they were with me. They were the car, the snow, the way through the snow. I heard their old stories in the voice of the snow, the brokenness held together with stories. The storm was an old being. Many had walked in it. The cold is a predator. It stalks its prey, biting first the toes, the fingers, then working its way to the heart. The car is a hunter. The car is a spirit. I am the car that continues on the road. It was the old ones pulling me through the night. The car is an island in a white sea. The car is an old migration trail. It is a sledge, not a hammer, but a sleigh or sled moving through the snow. How often words are at war with themselves, carrying meanings that have nothing to do with one another. How often the car leaves the road and connects with old journeys. How often one meaning becomes many. And it goes on for a couple of pages, but that is enough. Now, wait a minute. I passed a very important subject. Oh, yes. Bitterness and anger that suffering also can suffer is like the cold. It stalks its prey. It stalks the one who harbors it in their heart, biting first the toes and then the fingers and working its way to the heart. I was really talking about the Native American here, not just the cold outside. So you have a choice. You can either be very bitter about the past, and I am not in tribal life either. My father left and went to the stockyards in Kansas City before the Depression. So I did not grow up in tribal community. So I'm outside of that. And so I don't have that sharp bitterness that many people do growing up in the poverty of a reservation. So what else do you want to ask, Spencer?
Everything, everything. So would it be helpful to sort of talk a little bit about our friendship, and then Marianne and Catherine wanted me to read a poem, and then we just open it up, because I'm sure people have a lot of questions, and sometimes I find that the most dynamic and
Yes,
fascinating
I
part
agree.
than hearing the sound of my own voice. So, but Marianne and Catherine asked me to read a poem, and they were fascinated by the fact that Diane and I have stayed in touch for 30 years since that first meeting in a little independent bookstore. So once again, the importance of small independent bookstores as a source of community, as a church outside of the church, I
That's
would
true.
say. So I'm so grateful to be in this Zoom call. I have to say, I'll just preface it with this, and then I'll read you the poem. This is from a book called The Clerk's Tale. The book was rejected 300 times over 15 years and was finally accepted by Louise Glick in 2003. I could not believe it, because I had been rejected so much that I just thought, well, that's just the way it's going to. I was actually going to give up when I sent it in for the contest with Louise. But prior to that, maybe it was 10 years before, I had gone to Macalester College and met with Diane, and I was probably slightly forlorn, and I was working at Brooks Brothers at the time, and she prayed over this book. And I will never forget that. It was the two of us in her office, and she was serious about it. And I cannot tell you the amount of people that have loved and supported me to get where I am today. I am the amalgam and product of a lot of love. And although I have had suffering, I want to go with hope and positivity and expansion. I think for a long time, I myself felt like a bit of a victim, and that does not intrigue me or interest me anymore. So I'm so happy to be on the call, and I'll read this poem and then we'll open it up. I feel a lot of hope and a lot of excitement. We've all been through a very trying time for the last 7 months. I have quarantined with my elderly parents. My mother that went to that bookstore is now completely disabled and in a wheelchair and can't read, and is in the other room, and wanted to send her regards to Diane. Anyway, I'm also glad to be on this call and doing this, and I hope we'll do more. I was asked to do 2 readings. It was the week that George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, which is the town where I was raised and where Diane taught. And I was so disturbed by those events that for the first time in my life, I canceled doing events. And it's a time where I hope that we can learn from these things and be together. I was born in 1963, on August 27th, 1963. I don't know if anybody on the Zoom call remembers what happened that day, but that was the day Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And I still believe in the things that he said. So this is a poem about a farm. It's short, where Diane went and met my parents on this farm. The farm was surrounded by burial mounds, and it's called Midnight. And I lived there for about 3 years. And I think I was meant to read it tonight. It begins with a quote from E.M. Forrester, which is, "I quite expect to end my life caring most for a place." It's just a description of this place, the beautiful country of Minnesota. Pine trees stir in a chorus of darkness. The lake taps the shore as if to tell me something. A light rain increases the abstractions. All edges blur. Dark tilled fields stretch for miles. The Midwest settles into my chest. Colts bolt across untouched Dakota acres, alive with the cymbal smash of affectionate caresses. Farms, barns, somnolent cows, empty gravel roads, and distant houses make up the landscape I walk in, where once, a long time ago, Indians slept and walked, dissolving into the shadows with tenderness. On Andy Cleland's farm, the one closest to the lake, where cattails flourish at the water's edge, there is one huge hill, vacant of shrubbery. I was told once it was an Indian burial mound, and that was why no tree or bush would grow on that hill. All these years later, and the hill is still bald, whispering softly as the revolutions of the sea, echoing with the mouths of the vanquished. Sheep maraud across the hill's back, exhilarated by the dirt smells born again by spring. The wind haunted with the songs of comrades now gone. The rest of this panorama is immense, dark, impenetrable, unstructured. But if you look closely, in the left-hand corner, I can just be distinguished from the blue, blue brilliance of all this land. A tiny figure, no bigger than a grass blade, a shadow hugged by shadows, heading home after a long walk nowhere, encircled by a halo of rocks, trees, crops, rivers, clouds, by every blessed thing conspiring together to save my life.
Wonderful. Thank you, Spencer.
This was fun.
Yes. It's always fun to
Let's do it again.
language.
So
Really lovely. Thank you. Thank you both. I just want to say to Spencer, blessings on your mother and your togetherness now and all that's wrapped into that. We wish you well, and our thoughts are with you. We have a number of questions in the chat, and I know Marianne would like to ask one. So why don't, Marianne, if you want to unmute yourself and do that, and then I can come back and give some of the questions from the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you both. Just absolutely extraordinary readings and concepts and thoughts, and lots for us to think about. I'd just like to stay on the theme of language for the moment. And, last week we had the translator of the Elena Ferrante novel from the Italian into English. Diane, you write about the particular thought structure and patterns of the Native American languages and how impossible it might be to translate them. So I'm curious to know how you're navigating, and this touches on another question here about use of different genres, when you may feel moved to break into the poetic line, when you feel the lyrical essay form serves you best. if you might speak to that. But then also too, I mean, you're bringing together the great, text of Western civilization, Hebrew scripture, with the experience of the native culture. And because you made that statement about the different thought patterns, if you might just speak to us about how you navigate through those different kinds of thought patterns in your work.
I think, first of all, it's a primal, accrual. It's the way that our thoughts actually work. Sometimes we're logical, other times we're in the dream state, other times something interrupts our thought and we jump from one thing to another. It's just the way our minds work. There's a passage in Job, something about you will be in league with the stones of the field. Even that line has a rhythm to it. You will be in league with the natural setting, with the natural way things work. And language is so very important, so very primal. I've already used that word. It's an accrual of so much. And I just decided to go with a natural rhythm of things. And the minute that I wrote something a little bit strange or off, and my brain said, don't do that, it doesn't fit, it isn't proper, I turned that off and I thought, well, I'm going to try it anyway. I worked with this book of Job over, I don't know, maybe not 10 years, but probably 8. And I did other things in the meantime, but I always had Job right there. And so whatever I was doing, driving to Nebraska, Job would come into my thought because I was going to go see native artifacts. And Job was there with me, almost riding in the car, or there on the road. I would pass him like you pass a McDonald's. He was everywhere. And so I just decided to turn off the editorial properness that we're all taught in school. I always had a little trouble with teachers trying to correct the way I did things. But there is an improperness in the way we think, in the way our brains work. And I just trusted in that it would appeal to Job, hopefully. I tried to think, how long did he suffer? And it doesn't really say. The Bible, by the way, leaves out many things that we kind of have to fill in ourselves. And that filling in is also another technique that I use. His friends sat with him 7 days before they said a word. He looked so awful and was suffering so deeply. And then they began to speak, and then another friend shows up. And then God says, Job, you pray for those men that have been accusing you of wrongdoing. And then all the herds and flocks returned, and 10 more children were born. And that takes at least 10 years for his wife to have 10 more children. So the length of it, the longness of it, we just expect something immediately, like Spencer thought The Clerk's Tale would just pop into publication. And it's a long journey that we are on. So I just trust, I pay attention to my thoughts. And I think, oh dear, what am I thinking or what am I doing? And that doesn't make sense. But I just put that aside with enough confidence because I've written a long time now. And I've done a lot of proper things. And now I want to get into the more interesting, experimental, upsetting things. So thank goodness for Ruth Greenstein, who published this book. She's the first one who saw it. I didn't have to send it out a lot. I just said, Ruth, I have this strange book. And she said, oh, let me see it. And I had it to her in a minute. And she took it. And I was very happy. I don't know if that answers your question. I've given myself permission to wander through the woodlands and the swamps and the forest and over the mountains and over the rivers and all of that, and not worry about what comes of it. I'm going to do more of it in the future.
That's great.
Thank you. No, absolutely beautiful. Thank you very much.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat, and first of all, congratulations for being able to get the book published with the first publisher who took a look at it. That's very certainly a blessing. And by the way, we love The Clerk's Tale by Spencer, and if you haven't read it, you're all in for a treat to get that. But there's a couple of questions, Diane, that want to hear a little bit more about how you see your Christian faith theology in conversation with the what's happening now with the anti-imperialist movement, sort of post-colonial imageries. There seems to be, some dichotomy there, and how do you resolve that personally?
Personally, I cannot resolve it. There's a lot going on now that I cannot reconcile with Christianity. So I don't really have an answer for you. I'm sorry. I bet Spencer has an answer. I mean, he's an Episcopal priest.
Well, I have more questions than answers, and
Yes.
I think, as you get older, everything becomes less fixed, and you do the best you can, and I don't even know why I became a priest. Oops, I don't know if I should have said that. I mean, it just I just trust, and what was your question?
Well, the question was reconciling the faith that you both have, the Christian faith, with let's say the system of Christianity. I guess that's sort of encompasses it.
Clarify the question. Is that okay? Because I don't think it's a reconciling. I'm curious to know about how Christian faith can encourage the sort of anti-imperialist cause.
Yes. Oh, I agree with you. You're asking questions for which I do not have any easy answers. But when you read the Bible and you've lived with it all your life, you see all these ups and downs that the children of God went through when they were in bondage for so long, and yet they held faith. And after 430 years in Egypt, they were let my people go business. I just cannot answer these questions because it doesn't make sense to me. I don't have anything on my tongue, and even our priest is having difficulty, which makes me so happy, because these are things which I can say easy things like time will tell. And I've lived long enough. I've seen desperate times in America through the Depression, through the wars. There were times then when there were no answers, and you just hold on, and somehow it comes out all right, although we're not all right right now. So what do you think? I mean, we're in a dialogue, all of us. Do you have
one thing I do want to say is I often come up against people griping that life is not fair, that the world is unjust, which is illustrated by the book of Job.
Mm-hmm.
But the Bible as a book is never saying life is fair. That's never a promise when you come in that life is fair, because it isn't fair.
No, it's not.
It's not fair.
And it's not fun.
But it's not fair, but there's joy. There's joy, and there's expansion, and there's love. The thing that Jesus said that nobody else says, that is completely and continuously controversial, no other religion says, that is love your enemies. That's still tough to do. And that's why that Bible is so damn big, because we can't answer the question. It's very hard to wrap our minds around reconciliation, to get back to your point, and forgiveness. I've lived a long time now, almost 60 years, and it is not easy to reconcile because of ego, because of pride. People do not want to reconcile. I have experienced reconciliation. I have experienced going through estrangements, justified anger, and getting to reconciliation. And it is a beautiful thing, and it's humbling, and it's not easy. And the Bible isn't a manual for solutions, but there is reconciliation and forgiveness with Christ on the cross. If you want to go all the way to the finish, he's forgiving that, which is one of the most grotesque murders. Is totally grotesque. And he forgave that. And in my own life, I've experienced grotesqueries and come to some kind of peace. So it's complicated. How's that?
It
It is complicated. I can't even reconcile myself. I have these different fragments within me. I have an altruistic, I tithe, and yet that I want my own life. I want what is mine. So I have these wars within myself too. I guess it's just part of being a human being. And then in the world, it's just this huge sameness that I feel inside.
So let me, yeah, there's a lot there, and I want to kind of shift us back, pivot back to the actual form of the book, and have you talk a little bit about that. I mean, you combine poetry with essay form, and before you discuss how you assembled that in your own, I mean, I know it maybe flowed out of you. With all the systemic racism in the country towards Native Americans, towards Black people, there's voluminous books of nonfiction available about that we can read. But oftentimes it's really the fiction or the poetry that fractures our sensibilities to allow a path into greater understanding and a greater depth of feeling, which is, I think, what your book does so well, Diane. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. There are a lot of poets here and writers. They would, I'm sure, like to hear a little bit more. Thank you.
Well, I'll revert to Job 3:25 when Job says, "The thing I feared has come upon me." And Job was something like the mayor of Uz. I mean, he was a benefactor. And so what exactly did Job fear? What was his problem? He answers himself in Job 10:22, "A land of darkness, as darkness itself, and of the shadow of death, without any order, where the light is as darkness." It was the possibility of uncertainty that interrupted truth as Job saw it. It was the possibility of other possibilities that diffused meaning Job was certain of, that cracked open Job's certain world. It's what the Native American feared when they saw the encroachment of the European. It's what I fear in the political upheaval that threatens the foundation of the country that I know. So we are in a time of upheaval right now where there are no ready answers. And all I can say is just buck up. This will not last forever. Resolution finally comes. And I remember back in the 40s, my father coming home from the barbershop enraged over political opinions of some of the other men. I mean, I've always known this disruption. And that's one of the things God did for Job. He shook his world and gave him some unanswerable situations. And through it all, Job came out a better man. At the very end of the book of Job, Job says, "I used to hear about God with my ear, and now I know him by the seeing of him." He had lived through this long experience, and he saw God's justice and righteousness come into being. So please ask me easier questions. We're
Well,
getting to the hard core of the unanswerable, in my opinion, anyway.
Well, you do a great job of responding to that. We have from another poet online who's on our Zoom call, Julie Sheehan, a question to both of you about what you consider your moral responsibility to act. Obviously, your written works are part and parcel with that, but beyond that, she's wondering in the public sphere if you see any other moral responsibility or action you can take.
Of course I do, but I don't do it because I'm a loner and I would rather follow the trail of a thought in front of my computer. It's Spencer who's out in the public, so he can answer this question.
Okay. You got to follow your heart. You got to follow your heart. I was in the Hartford emergency rooms in 2009, a lot of gang violence, a lot of people that didn't speak English. This spoke only Spanish, and I did not speak Spanish at that time. And I was becoming a priest. I was dressed as a cleric and mute. I couldn't communicate with the families coming in. And I just prayed about that. And one night a boy came in, he'd been stabbed in the chest 25 times and he died in the morning. And the mother went, you know, lost it with me. And she did not speak English. And so that set me on a journey where I just said yes. And I didn't listen to what people, the negativity, there's a lot of negativity in the world. Oh, you can't do that. You're too old. You're too this. You're too that. You can't listen to any of that. And I was told I was too old to learn Spanish by a priest after Holy Communion. So you can't listen. And I went to the orphanage in Honduras. I had never been to Central America in my life. I knew nothing about the culture, which was probably a blessing, and was illuminated and educated. And I am not the same person after living with 72 abandoned and abused girls, which are probably the most unseen population on the face of the earth, all abandoned, many of them abused. And they changed my life. And I have been advocating for them ever since. And it brings me to Jackson Heights. The girls there bring me to where I am now. So you just have to follow your heart. You can't listen to what people say that's critical, or I'm an old white gay guy, and people were like, well, you don't know anything about Central America. I didn't. But if we don't take a leap, take a step to learn about another culture, to get stupid and say, I don't know what this is, but I want to learn, then things can happen. And you can make one small little difference in your life. So you just have to follow your heart and have a little faith and go and do and trust it, and you'll be shown. The Gospel of John says, look for the signs, and if you start looking for them, they will come. If you want to be active in your community, if you want to make a difference, go out tomorrow and look for the sign, and it will come.
That's true.
Lovely, lovely.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I mean, we all have gifts, and the goal and the hope is that we use the gifts we are given to the fullest of our abilities. So I'm just going to drop in the chat what I did at the beginning in terms of how to get the books of both of these wonderful writers and poets. And I'd like to ask Diane if she wants just to say a few closing comments to bring us home.
I'm just so very glad to be alive and to be in the middle of these problems for which I have no answer, but which I love to put into language. And I love to look at those who came before us. Job was an innocent man. I mean, island of the innocent. And God was on his throne, and Satan came around and said, give him to me a minute and he will curse you to your face. And we are given those choices. Which way are we going to go? What are we going to do? And Job proved himself righteous. One or two flaws which he corrected. But nonetheless, I want a testimony of my life to be like Job. No matter what is happening, no matter the boils, the children dying, everything gone, he maintained faith. What a testimony that is. I want to be like Job.
I think you should be the priest, Diane.
Well, you're both leading us forward, and that's wonderful. As are many other people on the call doing good works where they are. So thank you both. I do want to say there's another minister on the call, Rob Stewart, retired from Minneapolis, and he put some notes in the chat. So let's give a very wonderful, warm Zoom thank you to our two readers, Diane and Spencer.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you all. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Please join us again for other events, which you can find on our website. And I did drop in the chat where you can actually purchase the books from if you're not local. And we so appreciate your support and all the good works that everyone is doing at this moment.
Thank you.
I will also close by saying for those local, the Shinnecock Nation, who just basically finally after 2 decades had the town passed a resolution to protect their ancient ancestral grave sites, is now looking to have the town purchase land in that region that they can, so they can protect it and also have a learning center. So you all will hear more about that, those who are living locally. Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
We so appreciate it. Good night, everyone. Thank you so
Good
much
night.
for joining us. This was such an honor to welcome Spencer Reece and Diane Glancy. We're so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good night, everybody. Be
You
well.
also.
You. Everybody's going away now. I like watching it to see who's left.